My name is Alan Carter. I'm 42 years old, and if you had met me just a year ago, you would have found an ordinary family man who loved camping, believed in self-reliance, and wanted nothing more than to bring his family closer together. But after what happened in Tonto National Forest, I'm no longer sure how to describe myself. Everything we experienced out there changed me, changed all of us, in ways I never imagined possible. I'm still having nightmares about it, and sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I hear the same scraping noises along the walls of my bedroom that I once heard out in the Arizona wilderness. It all started with a plan, like so many things do. My wife, Dana, is 39, and although she's more of an indoors person, she's always been supportive of my desire to show our kids the magic of nature. Our daughter, Ava, is 14, a moody but brilliant kid who prefers the company of her phone and social media to that of pine trees and desert scrub. And then there's Cole, our 10-year-old son. He's a curious, wide-eyed boy who likes to spin tales about lost mines and haunted forests, usually gleaned from the ghost story videos he sneaks online. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that he has such a vivid imagination. He's always loved the idea of a grand adventure. When I pitched the idea of a rugged RV trip into the backcountry of Arizona, he all but jumped up and down, excited for a real-life quest. The place I chose was in Tonto National Forest, not too far off the beaten path, but remote enough that we could escape the noise of city life. I'd scouted out the route months earlier, fascinated by the idea of towering pine trees giving way to desert shrub, of dramatic canyon walls that felt a million miles away from civilization. Dana had her reservations. She's not a huge fan of remote locales, and she'd read stories about people disappearing near certain canyons. But I brushed off her concerns. After all, we had an RV. We'd be safe, comfortable, away from any real danger. At least, that's what I told myself. We set off early on a Tuesday morning, aiming to arrive with time enough to set up camp before dusk. Our RV wasn't exactly brand new, but I'd always prided myself on being able to handle maintenance. My dad taught me a fair bit about engines, so I wasn't too worried if a few wrenches needed turning. The kids slept most of the drive, while Dana read an old paperback about Arizona legends, occasionally looking up to point out a striking rock formation or comment on a new bit of weird lore she found. I mostly smiled and nodded, more intent on keeping the RV steady along the winding highways. About 2 hours into the drive, though, the engine temperature gauge shot upward like a rocket. I felt my stomach lurch at the sight. The last thing we needed was a breakdown in the middle of nowhere. Fortunately, there was a dusty pull-off spot near the road, and I carefully guided the RV over. Ava pulled off her headphones and huffed. "Are we there already?" in that teenage tone that spoke volumes. Cole, still groggy, unbuckled and peered out the window as if searching for some sign of adventure. Dana joined me outside as I popped the hood and tinkered around, finding a leak in one of the hoses. "It's not too big," I told her, trying to keep my voice confident. With some duct tape and a spare clamp, I managed to jury-rig a fix that would hopefully last until we could find an auto shop. Dana said nothing, but gave me a worried look that told me she would have preferred a fully functional RV from the start. I shrugged it off. We got back on the road and made it to our campsite by mid-afternoon. The site was a clearing beneath tall pines, close to the start of a lesser-known canyon trail. The sun angled through the branches in golden beams, giving the place a serene appearance. Ava was unimpressed, no cell service, and Cole was ready to leap out and run into the forest. Dana just rubbed her arms, scanning the area with a thoughtful frown. "It's quiet," she whispered. I remember replying, "That's what makes it perfect." Setting up didn't take too long. We aligned the RV on relatively level ground, took out some folding chairs, and quickly realized we were missing an entire box of kitchen supplies. Whether it had been left in the garage or lost during packing, we'd never know. We had enough to manage, though, and I told everyone it was part of the adventure. Ava rolled her eyes and walked off to find a spot with enough signal to post a single photo, while Dana busied herself reorganizing our rations. Cole perched on a large rock, flipping through some old maps of the region, delight in his eyes as he pointed out the rumored location of a lost gold mine. Around dusk, we fired up a small grill. The wind had picked up, sending cool air swirling around us. Dana still seemed ill at ease. She kept looking toward the canyon walls as though expecting someone, or something, to walk out from the trees. I tried to shake off her anxiety. "Let's just enjoy the night," I said, handing her a grilled hot dog. "You'll feel better once we're all around the fire." Cole had insisted on a campfire, so after dinner, we gathered a few fallen branches. The flames cast dancing shadows around our clearing, and I thought for the first time that maybe it was a bit eerie, but that could have just been the novelty of being out here. Even so, there was a stillness beyond the crackling wood that weighed on me, a hush that felt too complete, if that makes sense. I tried to ignore it and told some half-hearted jokes, but Ava was more interested in her phone's screen, which displayed no signal, than in listening to my comedic attempts. It was close to 11 when we finally turned in. Cole and Ava shared the fold-out bunk in the RV while Dana and I took the main bed. For a while I lay awake, listening to the wind outside. It rattled the small windows. I even thought I heard a voice, but I chalked it up to the breeze. Then, just as I felt sleep creeping in, there came a faint scraping. I sat up, heart hammering. It was gentle, like a branch brushing the metal exterior. I waited, breath held, but it didn't come again. In the morning, I woke to find Cole outside already, crouched by some footprints in the dirt. "Dad, look at these!" he called excitedly. I knelt beside him and studied the tracks. At first glance, they looked like animal prints, but the shape was odd, a blend of human and animal characteristics. The toes were elongated, and the heel, if that's what it was, left a deep impression. I ruffled Cole's hair. "Just a coyote," I lied. He stared at me, then at the tracks again, unconvinced but not willing to argue. Dana emerged next, scuffing her shoes in the dust. "Everything okay?" she asked. Her face told me she didn't really believe it was. I nodded, though that uncomfortable pit returned to my stomach. Ava was last to wake, complaining about how early it was. The sun was already high, so I just let her grousing go. We had a full day ahead, hiking down into the canyon, exploring a bit, maybe taking photos. We barely set off when a small pickup truck rumbled down the dirt road toward us. An older couple sat in the cab. They pulled over, flagged us down, and the driver rolled down his window. He wore a dusty hat pulled low over sun-weathered skin. His wife gave us a polite nod. "Y'all camping out here?" he asked, voice calm, but somehow serious. I told him we were. He glanced at his wife, then back to me. "Strange things in these parts. Just be careful after dark." His wife pressed her lips together in what almost looked like sympathy. Then they drove off, leaving us in a cloud of dust. We stood there for a moment, none of us sure what to say. Cole broke the silence with a hushed, "Cool," which earned him a stern glance from Dana. She marched on ahead, leading the way to the trail. Sometimes I still hear that man's voice in my head. Strange things in these parts. As we descended into the canyon, the pine forest thinned. The walls rose up around us, layered rock streaked red and brown. Ava's spirits perked a bit, and she snapped photo after photo. Even I found it exhilarating, this sense of rugged wilderness. We didn't see another soul on the trail, though I occasionally caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. A branch swaying, a small animal, a trick of the eyes. I couldn't be certain. We came across a clearing with an unusual rock formation. Cole insisted on investigating. Just beyond it, we found an unsettling carving, what looked like a goat's head etched into stone, with faded symbols beneath. Dana's hand drifted up to her mouth. "This feels wrong," she muttered. Ava took a picture, then frowned at her phone when the image appeared blurred. I told them it was probably vandalism, some bored hikers messing around. Yet, a prickly sensation crawled up my arms, as if the carving was more than just teenage graffiti. I decided we should head back. After all, it was nearing lunchtime, and the sun beat down harshly. The walk back felt longer, more ominous. We arrived at the RV, sweaty and eager for cold drinks, only to find the place in slight disarray. A chair had been knocked over. The side of the RV bore fresh scratches, not huge, but deep enough to flake off paint. Dana touched them with trembling fingers. "Alan, what did that?" she asked. I started to speak, but had no good answer. A bear? A mountain lion? Most large predators in this region were uncommon, especially near a busy trail. Then again, busy was a stretch. We hadn't seen another hiker aside from the older couple. The sense of isolation pressed in. Cole stared at the scratches, his eyes wide, and I felt the weight of fatherly responsibility. I had brought them here, to this remote place, and I needed to keep them safe. We ate a subdued lunch in the RV. Dana cleaned up in silence, and I decided to check the engine. It still seemed fine, though the tape over the hose was starting to peel. I made a mental note to fix it properly when I had more time. Outside, Ava fumed at her phone's complete lack of signal, pacing in circles trying to find a single bar. Cole huddled over his maps, the excitement from the morning replaced by quiet unease. I caught him glancing at the scratches on the RV wall more than once. "You doing okay, bud?" I asked, taking a seat next to him. He shrugged, biting his lower lip. "Do you really think it's just an animal?" His voice quivered slightly. I hesitated, then nodded, not wanting to feed his fears. Probably a coyote or bobcat. They can get curious. The afternoon dragged on in stifling tension. The breeze rustled the trees overhead, but it felt like everything else was holding its breath. As evening approached, Ava tried again to use her phone camera, filming short videos around the campsite. She seemed calmer when she had a task to focus on, and I was grateful she'd found at least a shred of normalcy. She came over to me at one point, phone in hand, face pale. "Dad, look at this," she said quietly. On her screen was a clip of the campsite from a few minutes earlier. I could see the RV, the folding chairs, even Dana off to the side. But in the background, among the trees, there was a dark silhouette. It passed from one trunk to another, unnaturally fast. "Probably a shadow of a tree," I said, forcing a steady tone. She kept replaying it, zooming in, her fingers trembling. "It looks like a person," she whispered. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Could be a trick of the light." She gave me a disbelieving look, but said nothing more. Dana wanted to pack up and move to a more established campground, but I hesitated. The sun was sinking, and we didn't know if the make-do repair on the RV's engine would hold for a drive on rough roads in the dark. "We'll get moving first thing in the morning," I promised. She seemed unconvinced, but nodded. That night, we tried to keep a small fire going for as long as we could, hoping the light would ward off any unwelcome wildlife. The kids sat close to us, quiet. Cole asked if we could tell stories, but nobody felt like it. Instead, the four of us just stared into the flames, occasionally glancing out into the dark. Pine needles rustled overhead. A twig snapped somewhere beyond the reach of our lantern. Each sound brought renewed tension. Eventually, we called it a night, retreating into the RV with every lock bolted. I sat up in bed, half dozing, while Dana lay next to me, restless. Just as I felt my eyelids droop, a frantic knocking rattled the RV door. It wasn't a gentle rapping, but a loud, insistent pounding that made my heart seize. Dana bolted upright. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. More pounding. It didn't sound like fists on metal. It was sharper, more like claws or nails. I lurched out of bed, grabbed a flashlight, and crept to the front. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle. "Alan, don't open it," Dana hissed, coming up behind me. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed it through the window. Nothing. No shape, no face. But I heard a scuttling on the side of the RV. Ava and Cole scrambled out of their bunk in alarm. The scraping resumed, circling around, tapping at the windows. At some point, the noise stopped. Then came a voice, my voice, calling from outside. "Dana, are you in there? Let me in." Her face went white, and she clenched my arm, because I was standing right beside her. Whoever, whatever, was mimicking me sounded close to the door. A malevolence radiated in that quiet knock that followed. We stood frozen, the four of us, not daring to breathe. Then it was gone, like a passing wind. Minutes ticked by before I mustered the courage to open the door a crack. The lantern I'd left out on the small table was knocked to the ground, flickering. The fire pit we'd doused was now nothing but glowing embers. Beyond that, only darkness. I closed and locked the door again, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out every thought except one. We were in terrible danger. When dawn came, it was a relief so profound that I felt tears burning in my eyes. We stepped outside to inspect the campsite. Cole let out a gasp. Large footprints in the dirt encircled the RV, leading away toward the trees. They weren't quite human, more elongated, almost like a wolf's paw, but with a heel. Dana clutched her arms around herself, shivering despite the morning warmth. I rushed to pack up, determined to get us out of there. The kids stood by, ready to flee. "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you earlier," I told Dana under my breath. She just pressed her lips together, eyes glassy with fear. But as I bent to examine the tires, my stomach dropped to my shoes. Each tire had been slashed, long gashes that rendered them completely flat. "Damn it!" I exclaimed. Panic surged. We had a spare, but not 4 spares. We were stuck, at least until we could patch or replace them. Dana looked ready to cry, and Ava glared at me, tears welling up in her own eyes. Cole was quiet, hugging himself. I tried to stay calm, rummaging through our tools. I had a patch kit that might allow us to fix 1 or 2 tires, but 4 was impossible with what we had. We might be able to limp the RV back to a ranger station if I could get at least 2 tires functional, but that was a big if. "Maybe we should walk back to the main road," Dana suggested. "We can try to wave down a car." It was an option, but it would take hours, possibly all day. If something was stalking us, if it returned that night, I feared we wouldn't survive. I spent the better part of the morning patching the tires as best I could, cursing under my breath at every pitiful hiss of escaping air. Dana and the kids kept watch around the perimeter of the campsite. Occasionally we'd hear a rustle in the bushes or see a shape flit between the trees. Once, Cole yelped, claiming he'd seen a glimpse of a tall, thin figure behind a juniper, but by the time I looked, there was nothing. Just after noon, Ava stumbled upon something horrifying. A coyote's carcass, torn open, lying near the edge of the clearing. The sight was gruesome, blood staining the dirt, entrails scattered like a warning. Ava retched, and Dana had to pull her away. That's when it sunk in for all of us. Whatever we were dealing with wasn't just playing tricks. It was dangerous, violent, and it had singled us out. I worked with renewed desperation, managing to get 2 tires to hold some air. It wasn't perfect, but perhaps enough to let us crawl out of this canyon at low speed. But the day was wearing on, and we still faced a decent drive to reach civilization. We decided to try at first light the next day. Meanwhile, I'd keep a nighttime watch and rig up some defenses. As evening approached, I gathered every lantern we had. I hung them around the RV in a perimeter, hoping the light would dissuade any creature lurking beyond. I also found a tire iron and kept it near at hand, though part of me knew a piece of metal might not do much against something that could tear apart a coyote. We huddled together in the RV. Cole was pale, his imagination likely conjuring every terrifying story he'd ever heard. Ava was uncharacteristically quiet, phone clutched in her hand, though it was useless out here. Dana sat beside me, one hand resting on my knee, her grip tense. We turned off all interior lights, letting the lanterns outside do their work. The glow illuminated the dusty ground for about 10 feet around. Beyond that, we could see only the tall shapes of pines and the hulking silhouette of the canyon walls. For a long while, it was silent. My hopes began to rise that we might get through this night without incident. Then, just past midnight, a low growl reverberated through the darkness. It started far off, then moved closer, echoing among the trees. The lanterns flickered as though a gust of wind had blown through, but the air outside seemed still. I pressed my ear to the RV wall, hearing shuffling footsteps, a scratch, scratch, scratch near one window. A shape darted just outside the ring of lantern light. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse. It was tall, its limbs unnaturally long, and it seemed to be wearing, or perhaps was part of, an animal's skin, the head shaped like a skull with curved horns. But the eyes, if that's what they were, glowed faintly in the lantern light, filled with a malevolence that sent icy fear through my veins. Suddenly, it let out a horrible screech, part human wail, part beastly roar. The kids screamed, and Dana clamped a hand over her mouth. The creature rushed at the lanterns, knocking one aside. Sparks flew, sending shadows spinning. I must have acted on instinct, because I found myself flinging open the RV door and charging out, tire iron raised. For an instant, I saw it clearly. A twisted, almost human face beneath that skull-like covering, mouth parted in a snarl. I swung the tire iron. It connected with something, a dull thud, though the creature twisted away with inhuman speed. Dana and the kids yelled for me to get back inside, but I wanted to keep it from smashing all the lanterns. Without the light, we'd be utterly blind. It circled around me, letting out guttural snarls. My flashlight beam danced across the clearing. I caught fleeting glimpses of something vile in its expression. My stomach turned as an overpowering stench, like rotting meat, filled the air. Then it lunged, swiping at me with elongated fingers. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a rock. My flashlight flew from my hand, and the beam spun wildly before landing on the ground. Dana emerged from the RV, brandishing a second flashlight and one of the broken chair legs we'd turned into a makeshift torch. She thrust the flaming end at the creature, forcing it to retreat a few steps. Ava stood in the RV doorway, calling out to us. Cole was behind her, sobbing. For a terrifying moment, I worried we'd lured it right to the kids, but the thing seemed fixated on me and Dana. The standoff lasted what felt like hours, but was probably less than a minute. We circled one another in that clearing, the creature pacing just outside the ring of lantern light. I could hear its raspy breathing. Then a sudden shift in the wind carried the rank smell away, and it hissed, a sharp, inhuman sound, before retreating into the darkness. I scrambled to pick up my flashlight, shining it all around, but saw no sign of it. The scraping footsteps vanished among the pines. Dana and I hurried back inside, slamming and locking the RV door. Our kids were trembling wrecks. I tried to steady my breathing, my mind spinning with thoughts of how close we'd been to utter disaster. We didn't sleep for the rest of that night. The four of us squeezed in the small seating area, listening to every rustle or twig snap outside. The creature circled a few times. Once or twice we heard it scraping along the metal walls again, but it never made another direct attack. When dawn finally lit the sky, we wasted no time. I stuffed everything we could carry into the storage compartments. The two patched tires still held enough air that we could hopefully limp our way out. Dana and I exchanged solemn looks as we fired up the RV engine. It sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. Every second spent in that haunted canyon weighed on us like an anvil. Ava was crying softly. Cole sat in terrified silence, and Dana fidgeted with her seatbelt, face pale as a sheet. I eased onto the dirt road, praying the tires wouldn't blow, that the engine hose wouldn't fail. The route out felt interminable. We bumped over rocks, the damaged tires whining with each revolution. More than once, I thought I saw a figure in my side mirror, but I couldn't be sure if it was just fear playing tricks. Once, we heard a distant wail echo through the canyon, raising the hairs on our necks. Against all odds, we made it back to a paved road near the forest's edge. A wave of relief washed over me when we saw the sign for a ranger station a few miles ahead. As soon as we had cell service, Ava's phone buzzed incessantly with missed notifications, but she didn't care. She just clutched it, tears streaking her cheeks. Cole asked if we were safe now. I wanted to say yes. I said yes, but in my heart I wasn't entirely certain. The feeling that we were being followed lingered until we finally reached the station's small parking lot. A young park ranger noticed our battered tires and told us we were lucky to have made it so far without a serious blowout. He asked what happened, and I just said we ran into some dangerous wildlife. He offered to call a tow truck, and we gladly accepted. While we waited, Dana tried to comfort the kids. Ava busied herself checking the videos on her phone, deleting the more disturbing ones. Cole clung to Dana's side, no longer thrilled by ghost stories or tales of lost mines. As for me, I couldn't stop replaying that moment when I stood in the clearing, face to face with the horror that, in my mind, I now call the Skinwalker. Maybe it was a spirit, maybe a shapeshifter, maybe something else entirely. Whatever it was evil, and it had wanted us gone, or worse. When the tow truck arrived, we spent another couple of hours riding to the nearest decent-sized town. The mechanic replaced our tires, gave the engine a better fix, and waved us off with a half-smile, likely wondering what kind of trouble we'd gotten ourselves into. None of us spoke much on the drive home. The kids slept on and off, occasionally jolting awake with frightened gasps. Dana kept glancing at me with concern, and I kept my eyes on the road, desperate to put as much distance between us and that canyon as possible. We arrived back at our house after nightfall. The place was a mess, of course, as we hadn't planned on returning so soon. I helped unload the RV quietly. Dana checked the fridge and realized we had next to no groceries, so we ordered takeout, then ate in near silence at the kitchen table. For the next few days, none of us slept well. Every noise outside, whether a car driving by or the neighbor's dog barking, made us flinch. Cole started waking up in the middle of the night, screaming about a monster scratching at the windows. Ava avoided looking at the footage on her phone and barely posted anything on social media. I overheard her telling a friend over the phone that she didn't feel like uploading pictures of the trip. Months passed. We tried to return to normal life. I went back to work. Dana resumed her routines. The kids went to school. But there was an unspoken tension. Cole had nightmares for a while, only sleeping through the night after Dana and I assured him we'd locked every door and window. Ava closed off in a different way. She spent more time alone, wrestling with the memory of that shape on her phone screen. As for Dana, she shared the occasional dream with me, describing being lost in the canyon and seeing that twisted figure looming over her. I told her I understood, though in truth, I felt more helpless than ever. How could I protect my family from something beyond comprehension? One evening, I mustered the courage to bring up the subject again at dinner. "I want us to talk about what happened," I said. Dana looked away. Cole stared at his plate, and Ava fiddled with her fork. "I know it's painful," I continued, "but maybe if we acknowledge it, we can move past it." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Cole let out a shaky breath and asked, "Dad, do you really think it was a monster?" I forced a small, sad smile. I don't know what it was, but it was real, and it was dangerous. Ava mumbled something about how we should have listened to the warnings. Dana reached for my hand, squeezed it gently. We eventually sought therapy as a family, short-term sessions to help us deal with the trauma. We never found a clean, scientific explanation for the events in Tonto National Forest. The local rangers we talked to had only heard rumors of strange sightings, weird footprints, but nothing official. It was just local lore, they said, or the result of isolation and overactive imaginations. But we knew. We had lived it. Now, nearly a year later, the nightmares have subsided a bit, but not completely. Sometimes, if a branch scrapes the side of the house during a windstorm, I wake in terror, convinced I'm back in the RV, hearing that scraping on the metal walls. Ava has a few photos on her phone from that trip, photos of Red Canyon walls and bright pine forests. but she can't bring herself to look at them for long. Cole no longer begs me to tell him ghost stories or take him on long camping trips. Dana, she's better these days, but she still keeps an anxious eye on the windows whenever night falls. If there's a lesson in all of this, I suppose it's that the world still holds mysteries we can't hope to fully understand. We might think we're at the top of the food chain, in control of our surroundings, but there are dark corners where old, malevolent things linger. They don't care about our modern comforts or our rational minds. They exist, and sometimes all we can do is run or hide. My name is Alan Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I've faced something in the Arizona wilderness that defies explanation. Even now, recalling it makes my heart pound and the hair on my arms stand on end. We survived, though, and I'm grateful for that. Maybe we got lucky. Maybe the sunrise saved us. Or maybe it let us go this time. I'm not sure. All I know is that Tonto National Forest taught me the real meaning of fear. If you ever find yourself out there in the deep canyons and tall pines, keep your eyes open. Listen to the wind, to the warnings of locals, because strange things happen in Tonto Canyon after dark, and sometimes you don't get a second chance. My name is Jill Saunders. I'm 34 years old, and this happened not long after I quit my office job and left behind a life I thought I wanted. I was trying to find some kind of clarity, so I hit the road in my old RV, which I affectionately call the Dust Runner. I drove hundreds of miles through the Southwest, always chasing clear skies so I could pursue my love of stargazing and photography. People often ask me if I ever get lonely traveling alone. The truth is, I used to love the solitude, until my time near the Painted Desert changed everything. I ended up in Arizona, specifically a region close to the Petrified Forest National Park, lured by the legendary beauty of the layered rocks and the vast desert sky. I'd read about less crowded spots where the sunsets were supposed to be glorious, and the stargazing sublime. I figured it would be an ideal place to collect my thoughts, put my heartbreak in perspective, and maybe kickstart a new chapter in my life. Looking back, I realize how naive I was, thinking all I had to worry about was the desert heat and the occasional rattlesnake. I had no clue what truly awaited me out there. I arrived at a little-known camping area late on a Tuesday afternoon. The place was a wide plain of dusty earth, colored in faint pinks and browns that seemed to stretch to the horizon. A towering mesa rose in the distance, layered in reds and grays. I decided that was where I'd set up, at the base of that mesa. My RV rocked over the uneven dirt road, but Dust Runner is sturdy enough, and I was confident in my driving skills. A stiff wind greeted me as I parked, sending grains of sand skittering across the desert floor. Aside from the wind's whisper, all was silent. I should have found the quiet comforting, but there was a strange edge to it that set me on alert. It was past 5 by the time I set up my folding chair and small table beside the RV. The sun was dipping behind the mesa, casting long shadows across the dirt. I took a few photos, adjusting the camera settings to capture the dramatic contrast of light and dark. The pictures came out beautifully, except in the corner of each shot, there was an odd blur, like a smudge or flare I couldn't quite explain. I fiddled with the lens and tried again, but that faint distortion remained. I chalked it up to dust particles in the air. As night fell, I discovered that the desert around the Painted Desert can grow startlingly cold. I bundled up in a light jacket, set out a lantern, and started a small propane stove to cook some soup. The wind died down, leaving a calm so pure I felt as if the entire world had paused. No distant hum of cars, no chirping insects, no howling coyotes. Just me, the hiss of the stove, and the faint crackle of my lantern flame. I've spent nights alone in remote places before, but something about that stillness kept me on edge. It felt like a hush before a storm. I woke abruptly the next morning to a sharp knocking on the side of the RV. It was so unexpected that I tumbled out of my bunk, scrambled into my boots, and yanked open the door. For a split second, The brightness blinded me. When my eyes adjusted, I saw no one there. The wind had picked up again, creating swirling eddies of dust. I poked my head around the RV, called out a tentative, "Hello?" but only the wind replied. Annoyed, but telling myself it could have been a branch or even my imagination, I decided to drive to the nearest ranger station for water and to check for any park rules I needed to follow. It was a bumpy half-hour journey. A small faded sign reading Ranger Station appeared, pointing to a low brown building at the end of a gravel path. As I pulled in, I noticed another camper, a battered pop-up trailer with an old pickup truck parked next to it. Inside the station, I was greeted by a woman in a uniform, her name tag reading Skylar Rodriguez. She was maybe late 20s, her sun-bleached hair pulled back in a ponytail. She seemed a bit harried but polite. "Morning," she said, glancing from me to my dusty clothes. "Need something?" "Water mostly," I said. "Refill for my tank. Also wanted to check if there are any permits required for camping near the mesa." She shook her head. "That's mostly BLM land out there. Just be cautious about flash floods if there's rain in the forecast. And watch your step. Rattlesnakes are coming out this time of year." "Good to know," I replied. Then, on impulse, I added, "Have you heard of anything weird out there? Last night was a little unsettling." Her brow furrowed. "Weird how?" I hesitated, feeling silly. I heard knocking and it sounded exactly like someone was outside, but there was no one. I forced a small laugh. "I'm probably just spooked by the quiet." Skylar gave a slight shrug. Could have been wind hitting debris against the RV. Strange acoustics in these parts. She hesitated, then offered, "If you need anything, radio in. We check the roads every couple of days." I thanked her, filled up my water tank at the spigot outside, and was about to leave when I spotted the older man with the pop-up trailer. He was rummaging through a large plastic bin, pulling out supplies. Hearing my footsteps, he turned and gave a wide grin. "Howdy," he greeted, voice warm. "Didn't expect to see another soul out here so early." I introduced myself as Jill, explaining I was taking some time off to travel. He introduced himself as Robert Mendel, but told me to call him Rob. He had a weathered face, kind eyes, and a broad-brimmed hat shading his graying hair. "You camping near that big mesa?" he asked, tilting his head in the direction I'd come from. I nodded. "It's gorgeous out there, but it's a bit too quiet. This morning, something knocked on my RV." I wondered if I was oversharing, but Rob didn't seem to mind. He paused in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck prickle. "You might hear stranger things than knocking," he said gently, as if trying not to alarm me. "A lot of history around these parts. Folks say the Painted Desert carries echoes of what came before, especially where those old families tried to settle. But that's just talk, or maybe not." His eyes twinkled with a mixture of mischief and caution. He seemed in no hurry, so I asked if he knew local lore. I've always had a fascination with myths and stories, even if I don't fully believe them. Rob nodded. "I've been roaming around Arizona for decades. Heard tales of a pioneer family that vanished near a mesa. Your mesa, if I had to guess, back in the late 1800s. Diaries mention they set up a small homestead, but they were never heard from again. People claim their ghosts are still out there, wandering." He gave a shrug. "Could be hogwash, but I did come across an old diary page once in a deserted cabin. Mentioned a mother and child who died in some horrible way. Spooked me enough to keep me cautious. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it as urban legend. Another part, the part that recalled the knocking and that uneasy stillness, felt a knot of unease. "Interesting," was all I managed. "Stay safe," he said, tipping his hat. "Maybe we'll bump into each other again. I'm moving my camp in a few days, but for now, I'm near the same patch of desert you are." I headed back to my site, a swirl of curiosity and wariness in my gut. Driving along the dusty road, the mesa appeared like a fortress in the distance. Shadows clung to its base, stretching out under a bright midday sun. The rest of the day was uneventful. I took photos of desert wildflowers, tried to capture the layered colors of the painted desert on camera, and fiddled with my portable solar charger, which wasn't functioning as well as I'd hoped. Late afternoon brought a mild sandstorm, a swirl of airborne dust that forced me inside the RV for about 15 minutes. When it settled, I stepped out to find curious footprints near my door. They were faint, but definitely footprints. Bare, human-sized. They trailed off a few yards, then disappeared as though the walker had vanished into thin air. The soil was soft from the wind-blown sand, so maybe it just covered the rest of the tracks. Still, the sight made my stomach tighten. That night, I was determined not to let nerves get the best of me. I set out my camera on a tripod to capture time-lapse footage of the stars. The painted desert sky is indeed magnificent, so dark, so full of glimmering points of light. But I found it increasingly difficult to enjoy the spectacle, as I kept thinking of that vanished pioneer family. My mind conjured images of ghostly figures drifting through the desert. I told myself it was foolishness, stress, leftover heartbreak messing with me. Around midnight, as I was reviewing the camera footage, I heard it again. The knock. Not a gust of wind, not a gentle scratch, but 3 distinct raps against the rear side of the RV. My heart hammered against my ribs. I grabbed my flashlight and flung open the door, flooding the area with light. Nothing. No footprints. No person. Just the rolling dunes and the silent mesa looming in the distance. Even the wind had taken the night off. I crawled back inside, locked the door, and peered out every window. No sign of anything. Frustrated, I tried to calm my breathing. That's when I heard a voice. Just a whisper, drifting through the open window by the kitchen area. It sounded like a man's voice, or perhaps a low moan, carrying a single word I couldn't make out. I slammed the window shut, threw on the overhead lights, and spent the rest of the night reading a dog-eared novel under the fluorescent glow of my cabin lamps, 2 on edge to sleep. The next morning, determined to maintain a sense of routine, I whipped up some coffee on the stove and took a quick inventory. My camera's battery was half charged, and my solar charger was still glitchy. The desert can be hard on electronics. The plan was to head out for a sunrise photo shoot at a vantage point I'd scouted earlier. But my nerves were ragged from the lack of sleep, and a creeping sense of dread clung to me. I decided to push forward, hoping the morning light might clear my head. The vantage point required a short hike across clay-like ground that crunched under each step. Eroded rock formations jutted up like spires. The rising sun bathed everything in pink and orange, and for a blissful moment, I felt awe overshadow my fear. I snapped several pictures, smiling to myself at the quiet beauty. Then, I saw something move in the corner of my eye, just a flicker of movement. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. By one of the spires, not 20 yards away, stood a figure dressed in what looked like antiquated clothing. The figure was turned away from me, head bowed, posture slumped. "Hello?" I called, voice trembling. If it was a tourist or a local, they should have responded, but it gave no sign of hearing. When I took a single step closer, the figure vanished, dissipated into thin air. I rushed over to the spot, my boots sliding on loose gravel. Nothing was there. My mind raced. A trick of the light? My imagination? Or was I seeing an apparition? My breath came fast and shallow. Reeling, I checked the camera, hoping I'd caught something in the frames. Just as I was about to scroll through the images, I heard footsteps crunching behind me. I whirled, startled, only to see a familiar, friendly face. Rob Mendel, wearing that broad hat, his boots caked in dust. "Sorry if I startled you," he said. "Didn't expect to find you out here." I tried to laugh it off, but my nerves were shot. "It's okay. I just thought I saw someone else." Rob nodded slowly, taking in my shaken expression. "Desert can play tricks," he said, not unkindly. "But sometimes those tricks are real." I told him about the footprints outside my RV, the knocking, the odd figure that vanished. His gaze was sympathetic. "I've heard the tales," he said. "Spirits, or echoes if you prefer. Some folks claim a family died near that mesa. The father went mad when they ran out of supplies, or so the stories say. I don't know how much is true, but I found this once. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The handwriting was old-fashioned, scrawled in ink that had faded. Lines read something about no water left and praying for deliverance. A name was half scratched out. Mary or Marie, it was hard to tell. Where'd you find it? I asked, voice hushed, as if the desert might overhear. Abandoned cabin about 15 miles from here, he replied. Been carrying it around. Never found the rest of the diary, but this page was enough to give me shivers. Talks about a child who fell ill, mentions dark shapes wandering near their homestead. I felt goosebumps prickle along my arms. A cool breeze stirred dust around our feet. I swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm cut out for ghosts, Rob. No shame in packing up and leaving, he said gently. But if you decide to stay, maybe just be careful. I've heard if you try to connect with them, offer some kind of peace, it can help. Peace? I repeated, confused. Closure, he said. These ghosts, if that's what they are, they're stuck reliving tragedy. Some folks say burying a lost relic or saying a prayer on their behalf can calm them. Whether that's superstition or truth, who can say? It sounded outlandish. Yet in the face of everything I'd experienced, I couldn't dismiss it outright. I thanked Rob for sharing the diary page, and he gave it to me without hesitation. Be safe, he said, tipping his hat. I'll be around the ranger station later if you need anything. By midday, the temperature soared, and I retreated to the RV. Despite the growing dread, I couldn't tear myself away from this spot. Something in me needed to see this through. Maybe it was my own search for closure after leaving my old life. I kept thinking about the father and child from the diary page, about how desperate they must have been in that isolated place. I understood something of desperation too, though mine was emotional rather than literal life and death survival. Afternoon bled into evening. I set up a small meal of canned chili, forcing myself to eat. As darkness approached, I reviewed the photos I'd taken that morning. Most were beautiful shots of the colorful desert, but in one image, I saw a faint outline, like a silhouette in old-fashioned clothes. It wasn't a smudge or a trick of the light. It was just enough detail to see the shape of a skirt, an arm. My blood ran cold. Night descended, accompanied by an eerie hush. To steel my nerves, I left every interior light off, save for a small lantern near the driver's seat. I felt that bright overhead lights somehow made me more vulnerable if something tried to peer in from outside. I sat with my back against the RV wall, the old diary page in my hand, reading the fragment over and over. No sign of help. The child burns with fever, begs for water we do not have. My husband speaks of shapes in the desert. I fear he is mad with thirst. I cling to our prayers, though the wind carries voices not of this earth. The words haunted me. I thought of the footprints, the knocking, the voice, the ephemeral silhouette at the spires. It felt like these people, these ghosts, were trapped in their final hours, stuck between worlds. If I allowed myself to think it was real, they were reaching out for anyone who might help. Then came the tapping on the window. Slow, methodical, like small fingers trying to get my attention. My heart thundered in my chest. I forced myself to move, to look. Outside that window, illuminated by my dim lantern, I saw a child's handprint in the dust, the shape of a tiny palm, 4 fingers, but elongated as if the dust had smeared. I gasped, stumbling back. The handprint remained even when the tapping ceased. Every instinct screamed at me to start the RV and drive far, far away. But I glanced at the diary page again. If there was any chance of giving them some peace, perhaps that was my best shot at ending this torment, for them and for myself. I recalled Rob's suggestion. Bury a relic, say a prayer, do something to offer closure. I wasn't exactly devout, but I believed in kindness for lost souls, if they indeed existed. Steeling myself, I folded the diary page carefully, slid it into a Ziploc bag to protect it from the elements, and grabbed my flashlight. Outside, the moonless sky was a void of black, pricked only by distant stars. The mesa's silhouette loomed like a crouched giant. My breath felt too loud in my ears. I forced one step, then another, following a vague impulse toward the base of the mesa. It felt as though something guided me. After 10 minutes of careful walking, I reached a slight depression in the ground, a place where the earth dipped, ringed by cracked stones. It felt significant, the desert air colder here than the rest of the open ground. I flicked on my flashlight, half expecting to see a ghostly figure. Instead, I saw old scraps of wood embedded in the dirt, maybe pieces of a collapsed shelter. My heart hammered. Could this be the site where that pioneer family once lived? I knelt, brushing away debris. An overwhelming sadness washed over me, the kind that clogs your throat and stings your eyes. My flashlight beam caught something metallic, a rusted spoon, perhaps. No sign of an official grave or anything, just a scattering of objects that might have belonged to someone long ago. I took a deep breath and placed the diary page on the ground. I didn't have much else to offer, so I took a small stone, shaped like a smooth oval, and set it on top of the plastic bag as a paperweight, like a makeshift headstone. "I don't know if you can hear me," I whispered, voice trembling. "I'm sorry for what happened to you. I don't think I can fix it, but I'd like you to find peace, wherever you are." I felt foolish, but an emotional tide of empathy rose up in me. I bowed my head, closed my eyes. The wind shifted, caressing my face with cool air. The weight of sorrow in that place felt acute, almost tangible. Then in the darkness, I heard a voice. A woman's voice, soft as a breath. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a sigh of relief, or maybe gratitude. My eyes shot open. My flashlight flickered. Fear pulsed through me, yet I also felt oddly comforted. The night around me seemed to lighten somehow, as though the stars brightened. I swallowed a lump in my throat, set the flashlight down, and began to scoop handfuls of desert dirt over the diary page, forming a small mound. I whispered halting words, some blend of apology, farewell, and a prayer for rest. My fingers shook, but I kept going until the relic was buried beneath a few inches of dust and stone. A sudden gust of wind brushed past me, then subsided. In its wake, the stillness felt peaceful. Not the oppressive quiet I'd grown used to, but something gentle, as if the desert itself exhaled. I stayed on my knees for a long moment, tears I couldn't explain slipping down my cheeks. When I rose, I glanced around. Nothing looked different, but I sensed a shift, a subtle lifting of tension. Making my way back to the RV, I half expected more knocks or footsteps, but the night remained silent, though not foreboding. I locked the door behind me, heart still pounding, and decided I'd stay awake, just in case. But exhaustion took me, and before long, I drifted into a deep sleep. I awoke at dawn with the sun warming the RV's interior. For the first time since arriving, I felt well rested. Cautiously, I stepped outside. The desert morning was bright. The shadows around the mesa no longer seemed menacing. I found no footprints, no handprints, no sign of knocks or scrapes. Even the spot where I'd performed my little ritual appeared undisturbed, except for the small mound I'd formed. Later that afternoon, I ran into Ranger Schuyler again by chance. She was patrolling the area in her truck. I flagged her down to ask about any recorded pioneer settlements near the mesa. She flipped through some notes on her tablet, shook her head. If there were settlers there, they didn't leave official records. "We do know of scattered families who tried their luck in the 1800s, she said. Most either moved on or perished in the harsh conditions. She looked at me with concern. "Are you okay, Jill? You seem different from the other day." I nodded. "I think I'm all right now," I said, offering a small smile. I was spooked, but it's better. She didn't press for details, but I had the feeling she sensed something had changed. Before she drove off, she reminded me to check the weather and be safe. I thanked her, feeling an odd sense of closure. As I watched her truck disappear in a cloud of dust, I recalled how desperate I'd been for answers just a night or two before. Toward evening, I decided it was time to move on. I tidied up the site, stowed my gear, ran a quick inspection of the RV, and started the engine. Dust Runner rattled along the dirt road back toward the highway. Passing the ranger station, I didn't see Rob's pop-up trailer, so I guessed he had gone on ahead. I wanted to thank him again for giving me the diary page. His kindness had pushed me to confront my fears in a way I never would have on my own. I resolved to keep an eye out for him at other campgrounds, or maybe leave a note at the station. As I cruised onto a lonely stretch of highway, I felt a sense of relief. The painted desert fanned out on either side, a rainbow of muted colors. I allowed myself a final look in the side mirror. For a moment, just a heartbeat, I thought I saw two figures standing near a distant rock, a woman and a child, faces indistinct. When I blinked, they were gone. Yet I didn't feel frightened, just strangely calm. Maybe it was my mind playing tricks, or maybe it was a goodbye. I'm not sure. I drove on, my heart lighter than it had been in ages. The sun was dipping low, gilding the horizon in burnt orange. In that glow, I saw the promise of a new beginning, a slow acceptance of my own baggage, my own regrets. Helping those unsettled spirits, if that's indeed what happened, made me realize that letting go is sometimes the hardest yet most necessary thing we can do. I know that rational people will say I hallucinated, or that my stress manifested in illusions. Maybe they're right. But deep down, I believe there's more to our world than we understand, especially in lonely places where history clings. Sometimes, the echoes of that history cry out for release, and if we're open to hearing them, we might grant the peace they never found in life. Even now, thinking back on it, I get chills. But I'm also grateful. The painted desert turned out to be more than a scenic stop. It tested my courage, forced me to acknowledge that we're never truly alone, not in the ways that matter. I like to think those spirits, or echoes, or whatever they were, finally found rest. As for me, I'm still on the road, searching for new wonders and writing about them. But the memory of that mesa, and the silence that once terrified me, remains etched in my mind. Sometimes, in the hush of a desert dawn, I catch myself recalling that night. And I whisper a quick prayer, hoping that family is at peace, hoping that anyone lost out there finds their way home. For now, I keep driving. The Dust Runner might be old, but it's steadfast, a constant companion on these desolate highways. I listen to the engine hum, watch the scenery shift from desert to forest and back again, and remind myself that the world is vast and full of mysteries. Maybe I'll stumble onto more ghosts. Maybe I'll find a new path for my life. Whatever happens, I'll never forget the painted desert and the shadows I encountered near that lonely mesa. In some strange way, they brought me back to myself, stronger, more open-hearted, and maybe even ready to start over.